In ancient Egypt, the legendary pharaoh Khufu is dead. Who will succeed the builder of the greatest pyramid in history?
There seems to have been a bit of tension amongst family members.
Now, Egyptologists think that investigating the turmoil of succession could solve Egypt's most enduring mystery, the riddle of the Sphinx.
There's no signature on the Sphinx. There's no stamp identifying it.
This is a story of lies, betrayals, and history's most enigmatic statue.
Mysteries and magics are all the time around the Sphinx.
The story of the pyramids is one of innovation,
It was a resurrection machine.
mysterious rituals,
These are things that help the deceased re-energize and live for eternity.
back-breaking work, and palace intrigue. Unlock the deepest secrets of the pharaohs.
Every mummy is different. You never know exactly what to expect.
Explore the lives of ancient workers and uncover the remarkable story of Egypt's old kingdom.
Not only did ancient Egypt make the pyramids made ancient Egypt.
On Egypt's Giza Plateau, the famous Great Pyramid has an equally imposing neighbor. This huge monument, formed of more than 70 million cubic feet of rock, was ordered by a pharaoh called Khafre. Around 2470 BC, Khafre comes to the throne and calls on a vast workforce to build his pyramid. Professional craftsmen and skilled laborers who are continuing a long tradition of pyramid building in Egypt. Khafre's father is the legendary pharaoh Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid. And just like his father, Khafre wants his pyramid built as a tomb that will guarantee his immortality. Today, the pyramid tombs of Khafre and Khufu dominate the Giza Plateau. But in front of them lies another gigantic monument, built around the same time, whose purpose and origin is much more mysterious. The Sphinx. Archaeologist Mark Lehner has spent years studying every square inch of this immense statue.
The Sphinx is unique. By and large, the ancient Egyptians did not carve statues on this scale for another 1,200 years. The fact that they did so at this time is another manifestation of this burst of activity, burst of gigantism in pyramids. It was a time of exuberance.
It's some kind of mythical beast with a human head on top of the body of an enormous lion.
Nothing like this had ever been attempted before on such a colossal scale. It is one block. It's made out of the bedrock. The Egyptians made the Sphinx by carving a horseshoe-shaped ditch, leaving the center as a core.
The Sphinx is the largest surviving sculpture of the ancient world. It is more than 65 feet high, the equivalent of a 6-story building, and over 240 feet long. So who ordered this supersized statue built, and why? It is a mystery that has puzzled historians for centuries.
There's no signature on the Sphinx. There's no stamp identifying it as a particular king. You do have signatures of a sort on the pyramids, but here at the Sphinx, no.
Mark believes it was built in the years after Khufu died. So it might seem logical that the Sphinx was created by the builder of the second Giza pyramid, his son Khafre. But the answer is not so simple, because Khafre should never have become pharaoh. Ancient records suggest that Khufu had at least 14 children, including 9 sons, from at least 3 different royal wives. Other sons like Kawab and Jetefre should have been closer to the throne than Khafre. So, Egyptologists trying to solve the mystery of who built the Sphinx need to also ask who succeeded Khufu as pharaoh and how. The first puzzle to solve is why ancient builders carved the Sphinx in the first place. What does it represent? Historians still don't know what the ancient Egyptians called this creature. It was the Greeks who named it the Sphinx, in reference to the legend of Oedipus, who defeated the monster by solving its famous riddle. But that was written 2 millennia after the Egyptian statue was carved. So what is this immense beast? And why was it carved in the middle of the Giza Plateau?
There used to be lions as far north as Syria in the time of ancient Egypt. Lions have always been also symbols of royalty, of kingship. They are the king of the beasts.
Well, from early on, pharaohs like to associate themselves with winners and powerful beings. So what's a powerful being? A lion. And so to be associated with these powerful beasts is a good thing.
So you have lions on thrones. They're divine creatures. They're solar because you think of them with their manes, and they're like the sun because of the color. But certainly you can see this link with kingship and gods and lions all together.
To understand the association between the power of the lion and royalty, we need to travel more than 5,000 years back in time to the very start of Egyptian kingship. Around 3150 BC, a warlike pharaoh rules the country. His name is Hor-Aha. Hor-Aha reinforces the borders of his kingdom by launching raids into neighboring territories. Archaeologists unearthed his tomb in Abydos.
Hor-Aha is interesting because he is the first king of the first dynasty, and he's buried at Abydos.
Abydos is this ancient center of power in southern Egypt, and it's the burial place for the rulers of the first dynasty.
Investigators examining Hor-Aha's burial found something shocking.
So you have the king's burial in the center, and then small chambers all around that tomb, in which different people are buried.
Some evidence suggests they were largely young people.
The discovery could be a sign of a gruesome ritual. In Abydos, over 5,000 years ago, some Egyptologists have suggested that the pharaoh Hor-Aha orders servants ritually killed and buried alongside him.
If the people buried around the tomb of Hor-Aha were sacrificed upon the king's death. That would be an example of a servant continuing to perform work in the afterlife.
If true, these would be the first known human sacrifices in Egypt. But without more evidence, doubts remain.
We cannot say for certain whether the people buried around the king were ritually killed, perhaps even committed suicide, upon the death of the king, or whether the king was buried and then at different times those people's burials were made as the people died natural deaths.
But animal sacrifice was much more common.
Among the tombs is the tomb where evidently they buried a lion. Throughout ancient Egypt, 3,000 years, lions are symbols of the king. They're even considered the guardians into the underworld.
Having lions buried next to Hurha's tomb, it shows that he is burying with him one of the symbols of the kingship.
This could explain why ancient stone carvers gave the famous Sphinx the body of a lion. It had been a symbol of power for kings since Egypt's first dynasty.
It's a guardian of the cemetery, it's a guardian of his pyramid complex, and in that crouching pose, it becomes a protector deity at the site of Giza.
But if so, why does the Sphinx have a human head? A fearsome lion-headed deity could hold clues.
When the ancient Egyptians put the head of a lion on the body of a human, it's emotion and fever and violence and anger out of control.
This is the goddess Sekhmet. She's the protective goddess of doctors.
She's the essence of fever and sickness. Doctors want to be friends with that force so they can draw it out of the patient.
Sekhmet has human qualities, but they are dominated by her uncontrolled animal nature. Perhaps with the Sphinx, it's reversed.
Here, though, you have the opposite. It's intelligence in control of the animal forces. The Sphinx symbolizes intelligence and control over might, over power.
But the intelligence and control of which specific human being? Whose head is it? Egyptologists have found a clue. Instead of a lion's mane, the Sphinx wears a headdress called the nemes, a garment reserved exclusively for kings.
So you have two things here: the power of the pharaoh, the control of the pharaoh, and also the guardian of the necropolis, all contained within the Sphinx.
So which pharaoh's face is on the Sphinx, and who ordered it built?
Mysteries and magics are all the time around the Sphinx. No one single name of a king was found written on the Sphinx.
There's still some mystery surrounding exactly whose face is on the Sphinx.
The answer lies in understanding who takes power when Khufu dies. Egyptologist Salima Ikram is investigating the Giza necropolis for clues. This is where Khufu's relatives were buried.
The color of the paints is still, in some places, so fresh that it looks like the artist has just put down his brush.
On the walls of this tomb, ancient artists painted an image of Khufu's oldest son, Prince Kawab.
There seems to have been a bit of tension amongst family members, but that's probably the case in a royal family when it is never clear who is going to inherit.
By tradition, Kawab should have succeeded his father.
Usually the next king is already known before the kings die. Always it is the oldest son of the king. If he survived his father, it means he is becoming a new king of ancient Egypt.
But Kawab never becomes pharaoh. it is his half-brother, Jedefre, who takes the throne. Is this unusual succession evidence of foul play? The theory that Jedefre murdered Kawab was pioneered by a famous American archaeologist called George Reisner. He is the first to investigate the chronology of succession in an attempt to unlock the secrets of the Sphinx.
The way that we try to understand the royal families from a period of history this far back is really to stand on the shoulders of Egyptologists before us. They begin with theories, and then we try to dissect these theories about these familial relations through time with new archaeological evidence.
It was George Reisner who was the first to have solved the riddle of the Sphinx, as he claimed it. This was about 1912 or so. And so he noticed that Khufu's successor, Jedefre, was not buried at Giza, and he concocted a sort of story that this must be a usurper.
Jedefre was born to a secondary royal wife of Khufu, who was from the area of modern-day Libya. When his brother Kawab dies, it's Jedefre who is next in the line of succession. Reisner sees a tale of murder and power straight out of Shakespeare. Modern Egyptologists have had their doubts.
You know, a sense of story is good because I think all human understanding is driven by narrative. But the fact is that the family history is hidden in fog.
But they have concluded that around 2480 BC, it is Jedefre and not Kawab who succeeds Khufu. And now they have discovered that this unexpected pharaoh did do something shocking. In ancient Egypt, Jedefre is the new king, having potentially murdered his brother. Now he makes an unusual choice for a wife.
Jedefre, son of Khufu, married his half-sister, Hetepheres II.
But incest was common with Egyptian royalty. So that's not why Hetepheres is an unusual choice. Hetepheres had been married to Kawab, who some people think Jedefre, her new husband, murdered.
Over here you can see the title for Hetepheres, where she is talking about being a great royal wife. Clearly this woman was one of the most significant women who lived in the time of Khufu and thereafter. This dress is really quite unusual because you can see it's very chic with the shoulders going up like that. And another remarkable thing is the hair color. Because people have said, oh, was she foreign? Because it seems that her hair is yellow as opposed to the more normal black that you see. Maybe this woman was a little bit unusual and therefore more special.
The widow of Prince Kawab joins Jedefre on the throne and becomes the Queen of Egypt.
By marrying the wife of the dead prince, it shows the people that you are welcomed by the whole family.
But does Jedefre really deserve his reputation as a usurper who murdered his brother? And could he be the king who built the Sphinx? George Reisner found other evidence to develop his usurper theory. Like all pyramids in Egypt, Jedefre's pyramid at Abu Rawash is located on the west bank of the Nile. Egyptologist Vasil Dobrev has been given special permission to visit the site and investigate.
We are 400 to 430 feet above sea level here. We are in the very high area of Abu Rawash, the highest in Egypt. And the name of the site confirms this. Abu Rawash. In Pharaonic, Abu is the place, Ra is Ra, and Wash is to honor God. So the translation word for word is the place where one honors Ra. So as someone who wants to praise the sun god Ra, this is the closest place to the sun.
Ra, also pronounced as Re, is the god of the sun. Evidence shows he became particularly important during Jedefre's reign.
Jedefre was the first one to really invoke the sun cult with so much attention. His name, Jedefre, is the first name where you have the term Re, the sun god, being invoked.
His name is configured with the name Ra, and he's also the first king to be called the son of Ra. And this is also important because it could be that Khufu declared himself as the incarnation of Ra during his reign, and his son, in order to honor him, calls himself the son of Ra.
In Abydos, on the walls of the temple of King Seti I, built over 1,000 years after Jedefre, Egyptologists have deciphered a rare list of Egyptian kings, many with Ra in their names.
With the reign of Jedefre, he started this new trend, including the name of God Ra in his name, and it continued until the end of the 5th dynasty.
After this, all the kings are called Khafre, Neferkire, and it goes on like this, and it's Jedefre who is the initiator of this very powerful movement of solar religion.
But not all Egyptologists agree on what role Jedefre played in elevating the cult of the sun god.
I think we should not draw too many conclusions from Jedefre's name or the location of his pyramid, because all true pyramids are solar monuments. So the focus on the god Ra, on the sun god, I think does not simply begin with Jedefre.
On the high plateau of Abu Rawash, Jedefre builds a pyramid with a base almost 350 feet wide and almost 200 feet high. The pyramid is much smaller than that of his father's Khufu, which was more than twice as wide and over 250 feet taller. But Jedefre picks this location wisely. By choosing a high desert plateau, he ensures that his pyramid would tower above Khufu's.
Jedefre builds his pyramid on a hilltop, and overlooking the Giza Plateau. But it's also very, very close to quarries, to stone that can be used for the building of the pyramid.
But it is here that the story of Khufu's successor and the riddle of the Sphinx takes another turn.
Although nothing remains today of Jedefre's pyramid, it was complete, or nearly complete, during the king's reign. It was very close to a quarry, and that same quarry was used by the Romans when they came into power in Egypt. And not only did they take stone from the quarry, but they also took stone away from Jedefre's pyramid. And that's why there's hardly anything that remains today other than the subterranean rooms.
Jedefre's pyramid was destroyed some 2,000 years after it was built, a misfortune that would push the king from history. It was only when modern archaeologists excavated the ruins at Abu Rawash and found statues of the king that Jedefre's name was restored.
In the ancient era, if a king wanted to proclaim his ownership of the land or to have the people understand who he was. He really had to erect statues and monuments to get that information across.
But the statues show that the destruction of Jedefre's legacy may not have been an accident.
Because the statues are destroyed or defaced, we know that there was political intrigue, drama, or discontent about the way that a king handled his rule of the country, because art is used as propaganda from the earliest period of time.
The noses had been intentionally broken and Jedefre's name chiseled away.
It's not so important that the statue actually looks like you. It's important that your name is on the statue. And if you come in and chisel out someone's name in hieroglyphs, you are ritually damaging that person. If you chisel the nose of that person's statue, they ritually can't breathe. So there are all kinds of ways to damage someone.
Could this be a clue to solve the mystery of who built the Sphinx? Because just like Jedefre's statues, the giant Sphinx at Giza also has a missing nose. In Egypt, archaeologists trying to solve the mystery of who built the Sphinx investigate the pharaoh Jedefre. Could there be a connection between defaced statues of this king and the Sphinx with its missing nose? The broken statues of Jedefre lead early 20th century Egyptologist George Reisner to another theory: that Jedefre was a usurper whose memory was destroyed by later royalty.
Reisner's taking facts like the statues of Jedefre are smashed. It could be because there's a reaction from the common people against the elite in the royal house. That's one possibility. Or it could be divisions and anger within the royal house itself and competition between collateral lines of the royal family. We don't know.
But we do know that after just 10 to 15 years in power, barely enough time to finish his pyramid, Jedefre is dead.
The reign of Jedefre was short comparing to the rest of the family, and therefore it makes us believe that his reign was not peaceful at all.
When he died, whether he died sooner rather than later, whether he might have been killed or not, we don't know. Khufu's other son, Khafre, took over.
Could the succession of Jedefre's half-brother Khafre, instead of a son, be evidence of more foul play? George Reisner thought so. He theorized that Jedefre was murdered by his younger brother Khafre, who then sought to destroy his memory by damaging the statues at Abu Rawash. Reisner suggested that Khafre's pyramid, built at Giza next to his father's, was evidence that the new king was returning to family roots after vanquishing his usurper brother.
George Reisner made up a story that he was overthrown in some sense by Khafre, who therefore came back to Giza as the home plateau.
But Egyptologists today have their doubts.
Reisner takes the facts and he weaves them with a story. The story of the rebellion, the revolt, and the anger within Khufu's family. Who knows? Maybe it's true. But it is really a huge inference for which, the linking up of the facts is kind of Reisner's imagination.
The broken noses of Jedefre's statues and the Sphinx may just be a coincidence.
We know that the nose in every statue is the weakest part, so it's very easy to be destroyed. I don't believe there is a link between destroying the nose of the statues of Jedefra and the nose of the Sphinx. I think it's because only it is the weakest part of the statue, so it's broken naturally.
Many think that Jedefre's statues were defaced thousands of years later during the Roman conquest of Egypt. Whatever happened, around 2470 BC, Khafre takes control of Egypt. He decides to build his tomb directly next to his father's Great Pyramid. Returning to Giza poses a dilemma for Khafre. He wants to show off his power with a grand pyramid. But how can he stand out next to Khufu's immense monument?
The Pyramid of Khufu is by far the biggest. It's the biggest of all time.
Khafre's pyramid is interesting because when you first look at it on the Giza Plateau, it looks like it's taller than the Great Pyramid, but in fact it's not. Khafre built on higher ground, probably to outdo his father.
Maybe that was a smart move. His base is actually a little bit shorter than Khufu's.
Even though Khafre's pyramid is steeper, it was originally 10 feet shorter than his father's Great Pyramid. But today, they stand as a majestic and almost matching pair on the plateau. Khafre's return to Giza marks the end of a complicated power struggle triggered by the death of his father, Khufu. But one great mystery still remains. Who built the Sphinx? Now that Egyptologists know the order of succession, first Jedefre, then his brother Khafre, they've narrowed down the suspects. And while Khafre was long a favorite due to his links with Giza, it turns out Jedefre didn't entirely abandon the area.
Jedefre has been long overlooked by Egyptologists. And I think that people should focus more on him because it is quite possible that he had more to do with building at Giza to finish off Khufu's funerary complex than anyone else did. Because certainly Jedefre succeeded Khufu, and it is traditional in Egypt that the person who finishes off a mortuary complex is the one who succeeds to the throne.
When Jedefre moved from Giza, his job in Giza was not over. We have information that he is the one who buried his father in Giza.
We actually have graffiti on the south side of his pyramid, and they mention Jedefre's name. So Jedefre was actually involved in the funeral ceremony of Khufu. That's hardly the role of a usurper.
And archaeologists in Abu Rawash have unearthed a link between Jedefre and the Sphinx, a statue believed to be the oldest Sphinx in Egypt. It represents the wife of Jedefre, Queen Hetepheres II. The evidence suggests that the idea and imagery of the Sphinx was developed during Jedefre's reign. And some Egyptologists now theorize that the Sphinx at Giza could have been built by Jedefre, but in the image of his father, Khufu.
The features of the Sphinx seem very close to the ivory statuette that belongs to Khufu. On top of that, there were votive gifts that were left between the paws of the Sphinx that mentioned Khufu. Also, the Sphinx wears an older form of the Nemes headdress, one that we find during the reign of Khufu.
So the Sphinx is a propaganda image, because through this, Jedefre, the son of Khufu, shows the Egyptian people that there is indeed a life after death, because his father Khufu has ascended into heaven, and now he is back on earth as a divine being.
Vasil Dobrev thinks that evidence it was Jedefre and not Khafre who built the Sphinx lies in the layout of Khafre's funeral complex.
I think it's a very simple solution. It's based on geography.
Ancient Egyptian kings usually built two temples for each pyramid. The first, at the foot of the pyramid, is used to worship the dead king. A long stone ramp called a causeway joins the first temple to a lower structure known as the Valley Temple. Located on the banks of the Nile, it was used for embalming ceremonies.
When you look at a map of Giza from above, you can see very clearly that when Khafre builds here, he constructs a temple in the valley. But the causeway is completely shifted to the south, as if he avoided the Sphinx. That means that when Khafre builds his monument here, there was already a Sphinx in the way. He tore up all the rules of Egyptian architecture, which is usually based on symmetry. In my opinion, it is Jedefre who built the Sphinx.
But Mark Lehner isn't so sure about this theory.
Maybe Jedefre made the Sphinx in honor of his father Khufu. Well, maybe, but there's no proof of that. There's not even any way to test such an idea.
Mark believes he can prove who did build the Sphinx. On Egypt's Giza Plateau, Mark Lehner thinks that the Valley Temple of Khafre, directly next to the Sphinx, holds the proof that Khafre is the pharaoh who built this giant statue.
I think what happened is Khafre had the idea to take a quarry cliff and turn it into the Great Sphinx. And as they did so under the reign of Khafre, the quarrymen took the layers from the head and neck, from the upper layers, and moved it to the southeast for building the Valley Temple.
Mark has examined the composition of stone in the Sphinx and found a match with the stone used for Khafre's Valley Temple.
As they went down and carved the lion body, they moved the stone immediately to the east for making the Sphinx Temple.
So if Khafre did build the Sphinx, which pharaoh does it represent?
Probably it was Khafre himself, a visionary, like his father Khufu building the Great Pyramid. What Khafre is kind of adding to this explosion in this period of experimentation on a gigantic scale, he's adding the Great Sphinx.
If true, Khafre is using the Sphinx to project his influence.
The Sphinx is the head of the pharaoh on top of a lion's body. And the symbolism behind that is the intelligence and control of the pharaoh's face on the strength and power of a lion's body.
In spite of the disagreements that still remain between Egyptologists about who built the Sphinx and who it depicts, all agree on one point: that the builder of the Sphinx planned to build a temple in front of it where the iconic beast could be worshipped by a cult. But it was never completed.
So in a sense, the Sphinx and its temple never got turned on as cult images, the way you would say, design a whole theme park and then turn it on and so people could come use it.
The builder of the Sphinx had no chance to consecrate its temple and to hire priests to ensure the continuation of worship. But after some 1,200 years of obscurity, new pharaohs would eventually reappropriate the site and imagery.
Generations later, centuries later, you get visitors coming to these sites, For example, Amenhotep II used to tool around the site in his chariot. He loved the site of Giza, and he actually built an entire temple oriented toward the Sphinx and left a huge stela there talking about his athletic prowess.
Amenhotep's son, Prince Thutmose, goes one further. He orders an inscribed stone slab placed between the legs of the Great Sphinx.
Thutmose. Apparently he wasn't the crown prince. He had older brothers. At this time, princes were educated in Memphis, and they were trained in military skills, driving chariots, shooting bows and arrows. And he was practicing those skills here in the area of Giza. He says in this hieroglyphic text that he slept in the shadow of the Sphinx's head, and the Sphinx came to him in a dream. In the dream, the Sphinx said to him, "Thutmose, my son, look at me. I'm surrounded by desert sands. I'm buried. Clear the sand away from my body, and I'll make you the king of Upper and Lower Egypt."
The young prince ordered the statue uncovered. Eventually, he becomes pharaoh, named Thutmose IV. He installs this stela, now called the Dream Stela, between the legs of the Sphinx.
Now this became the centerpiece for this little chapel where Ramses added his stela in the first year of his reign. Other kings and princes added inscriptions and stela in the first year of their reigns. This place, the area between the Sphinx's paws, this chapel, was where kings and princes came to be ordained, almost like the Vatican.
So you don't do that sort of thing without taking a kind of pride in the work of your ancestors, of pharaohs from the Old Kingdom, and enjoying being at that site, which was so remote to people like Thutmose IV and Amenhotep II, as these sites are to us today.
In the centuries before Thutmose ordered the Sphinx dug out of the sand, it had fallen into disrepair. So, the young pharaoh orders workmen to undertake a full renovation. In later times, bricks were added to protect the most damaged areas. They're still visible today.
So on the cheek up here and on the forehead, you can see a little bit of color, traces of red. It's possible that the Sphinx was entirely painted red. But in the New Kingdom, when they resurrected it, there's good evidence that they painted it in more than just red. When we were working in the chapel, I found little bits of Egyptian blue, this special pigment that the Egyptians were known for, in the interstices between the stone. And there were traces even of yellow. There was lots of red. Everywhere you brushed the stones before the restoration work of the 1980s and 90s, powder would come out from between the stones, almost like the Sphinx was bleeding. This is from when most of the Sphinx was red. There's evidence that wing patterns were painted against the flanks of the Sphinx. And in fact, some of the stela from the New Kingdom show the Sphinx with wings on the sides of the lion body. Why? Because it was a human, the head, it was a lion, but it's also Horus, and Horus is the falcon. So the Sphinx was a much more colorful, complex, iconic image in the Age of Empire when it was restored than the beige ruin that we see today.
An icon of the ancient world, the Sphinx retains its aura of mystery and enigma. For nearly a century, the theories of Egyptologist George Reisner about how the Sphinx was built were believed to be accurate. He romanticized the succession of the great pharaoh Khufu, imagining stories of rivalries, plots, and assassinations, but without any tangible proof. Today, specialists are more intrigued by Khafre's decision to return to Giza and build his pyramid next to his father. With no surviving record of who built the Great Sphinx, the mystery remains.
Whether Khafre built it, or, as has been suggested, the Sphinx was constructed in memoriam for Khufu by Djedefre, I don't know that we have good definitive evidence yet.
To be absolutely certain about the builder of the Sphinx, we will actually need more evidence than we currently have.
The builder of the second largest pyramid ever constructed in Egypt is well known. The pharaoh Khafre ensured his memory would endure by stamping his mark on Giza with his monumental tomb. But what Khafre does not know is that his will be the last truly colossal pyramid ever built in Egypt.